Magnus Carlsen played another game in the European Club Cup today, all part of his World Championship preparation. He wants to get some minutes under his belt, minutes on the chessboard, before the match starts on November the 9th. So this is the third game he's played so far. He won the first, he drew the second against Wojciech, solid game from both players. And in this third game, he was white against the German Grandmaster Alexander Donchenko, who's rated 26-10. But Donchenko is only 20 years old, and well, somehow with younger players, one never knows what to expect on the chessboard. Capable of some brilliance, but somehow, it's more erratic. So an interesting test for Carlsen, but of course he is the heavy favourite in this game. Carlsen with white played d4, and the opening was pretty standard. A standard collar, that is. One sees this in club chess a great deal. And interesting to see Carlsen play it. He has dabbled with this before. And typical of his, slightly offbeat openings. But it's a very respectable move, of course. c5 from Donchenko. If white doesn't claim space in the centre for his pawns, then why not do it with black? Very sound. Knight d2, an interesting move, just with the idea perhaps of taking on c5 at some point and transposing into a Queen's Gambit accepted reversed. Donchenko didn't take any chances and simply exchanged off. So now we have actually a Carlsen exchange variation pawn structure. And instead of going for c3 and bishop d3, it's slightly different here. If bishop d3, then of course the bishop can come out straight away and pin. But it's also possible to play knight b4. That could be annoying as well. But Carlsen goes for bishop b5, and he's dabbled with this idea before. Basically, white is playing a Ragozin reversed. It could be that white is going to put pressure here. Maybe c4. Well, let's have a look. Also reminds me of the way that Sam Shankland played in one of his games in the Olympiad. Quick compare and contrast. So this one came through a Carlsen exchange variation. You'll notice that after this trade here, then the pawn structure is exactly the same. And here, bishop b5 from Shankland. You can see the similarity. It's just that in this position, Carlsen has the knight on d2. Now, Carlsen played this against Wesley So in one of the chess.com speed events, and Wesley played a very sound move, bishop g4, and then c4, just like a Ragozin reversed with the idea of queen a4. And Magnus actually won that game. Here, Donchenko played queen b6. Well, that's quite a brave move, bringing the queen out so early against Carlsen. Against anyone, really. Carlsen played c4 here, so very much along this sort of Ragozin style. Could play queen e2, that's possible. And try to get back into this kind of a Carlsen exchange variation where you could maybe play c3 and drop the bishop back to d3 and try to prove that the queen is actually misplaced on b6 as a thought. But anyway, c4 from Carlsen. Seems somehow natural that to play this might be able to hit the queen in some way. e6 is possible, but Donchenko took on c4. And now a4, guarding the bishop. So Donchenko is absolutely keen to capture this bishop. And so Carlsen has to give up his nice light squared bishop. But he does have compensation in the form of a lead in development. And this is a tricky position because in some cases white might be able to play knight g5 and take here. So Donchenko rules that out by playing bishop g4. Now Carlsen exchanged this off. Now if black manages to bring his king to safety, then he has a large positional advantage. So e6, bishop e7, castles kingside. And then the queen just sits beautifully on this lovely central square. And on a light square, that's very difficult to drive away. There's no light square bishop. So it is essential here that Carlsen uses his lead in development to try and stir up trouble, stir up complications. And that's why he played a5. Already a tricky move. If black plays the natural e6, then you can give a check. And after the queen interposes, then d5. That's the sneaky idea. Just hitting that knight, and even in the endgame, well, white obviously has some initiative there. So after a5, Donchenko removed the knight back to f6. Well, it probably wants to live there anyway, but it just means that black has lost a bit of time, and white always has this option to check. So bishop g5 from Carlsen. You can see he has a big lead in development. Now, if black is too fussy here, if he moves the knight again, then that could be horrible, could be disastrous. So Donchenko played e6. Now, it's very pragmatic and it's a good idea. Of course, it's possible to exchange on f6, but actually this structural weakness doesn't really have much bearing on the position here. In fact, that pawn does a very good job of covering e5, preventing the knight moving in. And that queen still sits beautifully on this central square. So, I mean, it's possible for white to play like this, but in fact here, it's no big deal. Black is absolutely fine in this endgame, with the bishop covering c7, and the king comes up to e7, and yeah, black is fine here actually. So Carlsen tried something else. He played knight e5, and his idea is this. After bishop e7, only then did he take on f6. Now, if bishop takes, which you'd think is kind of the move we'd like to play to keep that nice structure, then there's a check. After the queen blocks, then rook over. Now, I dare say with accurate play, black could probably hold this, but there's no doubt that white has a little bit of an initiative here after the rook comes in. That's a Carlsen kind of position. So Donchenko played very bravely. He wasn't going to acquiesce to some slightly worse endgame. He took on f6 with the pawn. So the knight is attacked. Now if check, now the queen blocks, and in this case actually black is fine because white is going to have to waste the tempo moving the knight back. No problem in the endgame. So Carlsen played knight g4. Now I think this is his idea anyway. That knight is going to spin around here to attack the queen, drive it away from the nice central square. But Donchenko is fighting hard. So the rook and the queen attack d4. And if check, this is very interesting. Actually, it's not even necessary to block with the queen. In fact, king f8 is a very good move. Because with white's queen away from the king side, then it's time for black to start an initiative here. The king is perfectly safe on f8. g-file can be used, f4 is coming, black has an initiative there. That's dangerous. So after rook d8, the queen and rook attack the d-pawn, so rook a4 from Carlsen defending the d-pawn. Queen b5, interesting. Might make way for a rook on a good day. But just looking down here, and also of course preempting white, playing knight e3, attacking the queen. I mean, I think knight e3 could be played here actually, because f5 is coming anyway, and I don't think Carlsen would be too worried about giving up the pawn. I mean, white does have some compensation there, but actually I think the best move is f5 anyway. and it's just a double-edged position. But instead Carlsen played b3. I mean, I was quite surprised about that, actually. Not that it's a bad move, but I thought he would go for it just by giving the b pawn. f5, and the knight dropped to e3. And f4. Pushing the knight again, so it moves to c4. And now here, I think rook g8 is best. And after knight e5, let's play queen d5. And I think the position is about equal, or, well, balanced chances. With the pressure on the g file, I don't see that white can somehow generate play for himself. But I think white is solid enough here. But after knight c4, in fact, Donchenko played bishop f6. And after this, actually things start to look a little bit dicey. So Carlsen has succeeded in breaking Black's blockade on d5 and pushing this pawn. Now, this pawn could be taken, of course, but queen f3, queen d2, I mean, there's no doubt that white has compensation here. You can see with the pawn split, that's a Carlsen kind of position, actually. He loves playing against that kind of structural disadvantage. But f3 from black. And this is a very important moment in the game where Carlsen, it looks like, missed a good move. He played g3 here. He could have played g4, which is a scary looking move, actually, because it just leaves white's king looking pretty drafty. So what's the point of it? Well, first of all, if the queen moves away, then queen takes f3, and white has won a pawn. With the queen defending on the king side, then should be okay for white. So g4, rook g8. And now a really good move. Just when it looks like white could be in trouble here. King h1. Maybe Magnus didn't investigate this as thoroughly as he might. So after this exchanged, again, if the queen had moved, then the f pawn was on prise. And now here's the point: rook g1, hitting the queen, and when the queen moves, there's a check, and there's a sneaky move coming. d6. That has to be taken. And then knight c8 check. So this is a pretty much forced variation. And then rook takes rook. Now, I wouldn't say this endgame is winning for white. Definitely better for white. I mean, I think white's problem is that the king is miles away from enemy territory. Takes some time for the king to come into the game. Black has two pawns, but somehow rook against bishop, you feel white has pretty decent winning chances. But instead of g4, Magnus played g3. And it's still not clear, actually. If castles, you can forget that. Rook f4 will win the f pawn. So bishop e5 prevents this rook coming here. So this is the game continuation. Now rook e1 looks like a pretty decent move just to bring the next rook into the game. And I think black's position is looking a little bit fragile. But rook c4 played by Carlsen. h5, and only now rook e1. Even here, white has an interesting continuation. Rook e3 looks very interesting, but Carlsen went for rook h4. Now it's very, very complicated. And I think both players invested quite a lot of time up to this point. So I mean, it's possible that time was an issue. I didn't see this phase of the game, so I don't know whether they were actually in time pressure. But some of these moves look, maybe not quite as accurate as they could be. So, for example, here Carlsen had the possibility to play rook e4 and potentially rook f4 again. And after this, well, let me show you this. This is a nice tactic. I mean, bishop f6 is the best move here, but if rook takes d5, we've got this. Rook takes. Now be careful because there's a back rank checkmate, but here we play knight d6 check, and in that way we're going to win a piece. Okay, back to this position. So bishop c3 played, rook f4, queen came in, obviously threatening mate on g2, so that was taken. So Magnus has sacrificed the exchange. And obviously white has compensation because the king is stuck in the middle. The rooks are split. They don't work well together. But here Donchenko has a very swift attack on the rook's file. And actually after this, pawn takes pawn. Now Magnus had to force a draw by perpetual check after queen a4 check. And another check. Now of course if the king steps to the g file, then rook takes is well, a bit annoying. I mean, I know that rook g6 is possible, but it doesn't look great. So king e8 played, queen check, and that was that. Draw by perpetual check, or repetition of position, whichever way you want to look at it. I think Magnus will be very disappointed with that game. He succeeded in creating an unbalanced position, but he couldn't quite get enough to finish off his opponent. And Donchenko played pretty well, actually. He played actively, he played, I think, without fear. So all credit to him, but that draw leaves Magnus still #1 on the rating list, but the difference is just 4.3 points. Carlsen with 28.36.6, Caruana in second with 28.32.3. So I know Carlsen sets great store in being #1 on the rating list. He's been #1 for the past 7 years, and he wants to keep it that way. So let's see what happens in later rounds. Do check out the Carlsen playlist up there if you want to see more games by the world champion, and indeed more games from this event if you've missed those. And if you're not a subscriber, then free to subscribe. Click on the button as well. Will Magnus stay #1 on the list? Is he running into a bit of dodgy form before the World Championship match? What do you think? Tell me what you think about his play so far. Thanks for watching.